folks, welcome to the British History Podcast. Thank you so much for your time today. You've just done your sound check, so we're going to do this quickly before you go and do your talk.
Yeah.
You're talking about your latest book, The Mercian Chronicles, which for anyone listening or watching in the US is called The Birth of the Anglo Saxons, I believe.
That's right, yeah, different title, same book. Yeah.
Different title, same book. So just to make that clear to everyone, I am absolutely fascinated by the Anglo Saxon period, but I've got into it in the last 2 or 3 years, so I was very keen to be able to speak to you about it. I am consuming as much as I possibly can. It is such a complex period and so often overlooked, but I think as soon as people get into it, I think it's
the thing is, it's people say the past is a foreign country, but actually they're our neighbours, they're our ancestors. They're not, in some ways they're very different from us, but in other ways, they have all the same emotions as us. They suffer all the same slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we do. So, in a way we're actually deeply connected to them. They're different, but not that different. They're long lost relatives rather than people in a foreign country. But yeah, it's a fascinating period. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think maybe we can relate to the Romans a little bit easier. So we go Romans, Normans, and there's this big gap in the middle. So I was interested to know what you think the biggest misconception of the period is.
I suppose it's this idea that a sort of barbarian tribal society is uncivilized, that it's an era of great violence, of fate, really of no statehood, no political institutions, almost an anarchy. And that's absolutely as far from the truth as it could possibly be. The institutions by which tribal society keeps itself together are quite well understood. They're a little different from the modern world in some respects, but in others they're quite similar. So society is held together by a system of patronage, essentially. Lords need to know who their peasants are so they can tax them. Peasants need to know who their lords are so that they can get the benefits of patronage, which is feasting, possibly preferment for their children, opportunities to share in glorious victory, whatever, and security. And that relationship is really fundamental. And the really powerful thing in Anglo-Saxon society is this idea of reciprocity. A gift requires a gift in return, which requires a gift in return. A debt is never paid. Gift for gift, blow for blow, vengeance for vengeance. So one of the things that Anglo-Saxon kings are very, very keen to try and stop is the blood feud. All tribal societies face it. If you think of mafia politics, somebody does somebody a disservice, somebody disrespects somebody, then somebody's going to be disrespected back. If you become part of the family, you're part of the family. If you break the code, you're in trouble. And in the Anglo-Saxon world, if you broke the code, you became outlaw, literally out with the law. If you didn't have a lord, you were nothing. I always think of asking the first question that you would ask somebody who you met in Anglo-Saxon England if you didn't know them, and your first question would not be who they are, would be who is your lord?
Right.
A bit like in Ireland, still people want to know your surname, and that tells them where your ethnic and religious heritage is. That's what they want to know, still in some cases. So once you understand those rules, you understand a society that is very closely bound by kinship, by obligation, by historical amity and historical enmity. My father fought for your father, therefore you owe me that same relationship. My father was your enemy, I'm your enemy.
Right.
Okay, so if you understand that reciprocality, you begin to get some idea of how that system works.
And so I've in your book, it strikes me So you talked about the enmity there and blood feuds and stuff, but you also talk about how they're actually after peace a lot of the time, because peace means trade, which means prosperity, which means abundance.
Yeah, and war is really dangerous.
Yes.
You know, you can get hurt. So one of the things that the Mercian, well, it's either the Mercian kings or the Mercian bishops or the Mercian abbots and abbotesses or European traders, we're not quite sure who it is. Somebody figures out how to make money, actual money to build an economy. And they realise that to build an economy you need institutional stability. So when a king dies, somehow the state must continue as an institution. When an abbot or an abbess dies, the monastery must continue as an institution. The wealth is being driven firstly by trade from Europe across the Channel, which has never really stopped, but it picks up again in the sort of late 7th century. It's also been driven by the key change that happens, the real revolution that starts this all off, is land is held, as it were, leasehold by a warrior in return for military service in the king's war band. When the warrior dies, that land might then pass to his son, but only if his son is a warrior in the king's war band. In other words, it's contingent on you serving the king. This is this sort of patronage and reciprocity thing. In return, you get to sit at the king's mead table, be part of the war band, be part of that sort of the culture of the mead hall, glory in battle, and you're rewarded with a piece of land from which to gather all the goods and services that land renders. And bring up a family on it until you die, and then that land goes back to the king. That relationship changes fundamentally in the 7th century with the arrival of Christianity, because kings are giving those bits of land away. These are estates. They're giving these estates away to holy men and women, who themselves are very often members of the aristocracy, if not the royal family. It's keeping the land in the family. But that land cannot be held leasehold, because the relationship that's being offered by the church is one of eternity, of universality, of an everlasting life of the soul after death. It's the end of impermanence. It's the idea of permanence coming into it. If that relationship is permanent, the land must be held permanently. When an abbot or an abbess dies, that land is still held by that institution, by charter of the king. That means those monasteries can invest in people, they can invest in new breeding stock, they can invest in new strains of grain, they can invest in technology like water mills, and they can start trading a surplus. And they do very actively. What we think of as trade is handled rather differently, and there's some really beautiful examples of a king writing to an abbot saying, well, I send you these gifts, which are just gifts from me, as gifts of friendship, a gold chalice weighing 3 pounds and some fine cloaks that I've had made, and so on. And all I ask in return is your friendship and your prayers. By the way, there is just one other thing you might give me. If you could lay your hands on a pair of really good hunting falcons, that would be great, because we can't get hold of them. Okay, this is what we now call transactional patronage. Okay, and so they get round this idea of trade being something not quite right by having this sort of reciprocality carry on through trade. And in that sense, the relationship between a bishop and an abbot is the same as a king and a lord. It's that same relationship of the patron to the patronised. And it fosters this revolution in the idea of a medieval state which survives the death of the participants. The institutions survive the death of the participants. It's revolutionary, and it happens between the history told by Bede, the rise of Northumbria in the 7th century, and the history of the rise of Wessex as told by Alfred at the end of the 9th century. In between, there's this unwritten revolution happens, and only really archaeology and the surviving charter evidence, the written evidence of the charters, can tell us that this revolution is going on, but it's been written out of the standard historical text, and that's what I'm trying to address here.
So you focus on Mercia, And I think perhaps people who are less familiar with the period, you've just mentioned there Alfred and Wessex. You know, Alfred, brilliant because he gets his own history told from the Wessex perspective. Obviously, we know the Anglo Saxon Chronicles. How difficult was it to piece a Mercian history together? And does that sort of maybe lack of a main narrative for Mercia mean that people don't realise just how important Mercia was?
That's true. It's a neglected. I mean, you know, historians and archaeologists know that there's something special going on in Mercia. Piecing together that narrative from a much wider variety of disparate, very difficult, inconsistent sources is, on the one hand, very difficult, which is why it's very rarely done. It's a difficult thing to do. You know, I realised halfway through, I think, oh my God, what have you taken on? It's really difficult. Yeah. On the other hand, you don't have the history, so you're not tied to a standard narrative. I mean, in Northumbria, Bede is such a dominant story. It's very difficult to write a non-Bedan story, just as it is in Wessex to write a non-Anglo Saxon Chronicle story, because they're telling you what happened, or supposedly telling you what happened. In Mercia, we don't have that. Either it was lost, destroyed by the Vikings, or it was destroyed by Alfred, or they simply never wrote their history down in the sense of a standard historical narrative. So that story is written in coins found in fields. It's written in trading goods found on archaeological sites. It's written in the geography of our place names. It is written down in charters, but unfortunately the charters that survive, Kings promulgated charters to record things that were on the edges of their territory because they didn't need to do it for their own homelands. So there are actually no charters telling us who acquires what land, how, under what circumstances, when. For central Mercia, it all comes from the periphery, the edges of Mercia, places like Gloucester and Worcester and Kent and East Anglia and so on. So that's really problematic. On the other hand, it does give you this absolute fresh canvas to work with, where, you know, I'm an archaeologist by training, so I'm quite comfortable dealing with those sorts of evidence that don't give you a this happened, then that happened. So you're having to piece stories together from very fragmented sources. And in a sense, what you're doing is, you know, going into an old-fashioned film editing room and the director has left and all you've got is a pile of snippets of film cut clippings left on the editing floor. You think, oh my God, what the hell am I to do with it? And you put two pieces together and think, oh, look, that makes a convenient story. Then you realise that any three pieces of film make a totally different story. Right. So you have to, in the end, decide which story you can tell, and knowing that you can never really tell the truth, but knowing that if you do justice to those sources, you can create a sort of evocation of a period that you hope invites the reader to make some of their own judgments. The last thing I want to do is tell readers what they should be thinking. I'm the sort of historian who, if I see a sign that says interesting historical attraction, I go the other way. I don't want anybody telling me the story that I want to understand. And I don't want my readers to think that the story I'm telling is the only story. I want to show them, in a sense, how the workings of how I put this together, the mechanism behind it, so they can go, well, I don't like, that's rubbish, or oh, okay, I hadn't thought of that before, or whatever. But readers, I need to be involved in the story making. And the corollary of that, of course, is that when you've finished a book and it comes out, you absolutely cannot tell how readers will take it. You've no idea. I mean, you know, I'm astonished by some things people say about things I've written. I think, no, that's not what I meant at all. But you've given it to the reader. It's their book now. Yes. You've given it. Well, that's your act of generosity. You've handed over that story to them. Sometimes you're very surprised about what they make of it.
Well, the fact that you write about them as well, it keeps that alive for future generations, for other people to come to it and use that as a springboard to find evidence for or evidence against what you've managed to tell, and it keeps it going.
Yeah, and in 20 years' time, you hope somebody will say, well, when Adams was writing about Mercia in the 2020s, he didn't know this,
Yes.
and he wasn't looking at this, and we now have a totally different perspective on it. But it's a sort of something to react against, and a couple of people have tried to write books pulling all the Mercian material together, but it's a very difficult thing. What I hope you get is a narrative about how the institutions that make the world work sit in the real landscape that we can, because the landscape of the Mercian kings is a landscape of Roman roads. Well, one of those is the A5, Watling Street, and the other one is the Fosse Way. You can still drive along both of those roads. Those roads connect navigable rivers, as they did in the Roman period, as they did in the Viking period, as they do now. It's a connected world. The names that are such a rich source of English cultural history, the Burgtuns, Burton on the Water, that extraordinary. I visited for the first time on foot for another book. Walking the English landscape is how to understand. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my life. This tiny Cotswold village with 25,000 people.
Oh yes,
it's like, what? I'm going, this is a Mercian burg. This is key part of the Mercian administrative set. Do you not realise this? So that, seeing people now in the landscape that I understand through a sort of different series of codes is just fascinating. And you see the line of an old hedge, and because you understand that landscape, you read the language, you can go, yeah, that has been like that for a very specific historical reason. And we can still read it. The names, the shapes of things, the boundaries of our parishes and townships, they're very, very old. Some of them go back to the Bronze Age. We live in a landscape of very deep time. And the other really striking thing is, we think of Mercia, the Midlands, big square of the Midlands, and we think of it as, Middle England. But, Gloucester and Lincoln, they're worlds apart. Chester and London.
Yeah, when I first found out London was part of Mercia.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
Well, of course, the Mercian kings made sure London was part of Mercia. London is the prize. Okay, London is not in Mercia until it becomes part of Mercia. It's the funnel of all trade and power. But it takes men and women of enormous imagination to conceive of a state where there is no state, to forge an institutional state out of a tribal state is an incredible achievement. And Alfred gets the credit for it. He did what Churchill said he was going to do. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it, which of course Churchill did. So did Alfred. The Mercian kings didn't write their own history. That history is told in incidentals, discarded. It's a paper chain, scraps of things left behind that we have to follow. Makes it all the more interesting to study it, of course, because we're not told what to think about it. It's there. But the more I studied the rise of Mercia in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, the more I realised that really what's going on is practically revolutionary. We can't put a name to the revolutionaries. We don't have our Che Guevaras or our Lenins or our Isambard Kingdom Brunels, but those people are in there somewhere, and it may be we do know their names, we just can't connect the names up to the achievement. The achievement is immense. It's the birth of the medieval state. It's what makes England so attractive for Vikings and Normans and Germans and everybody else who tries to invade, with apologies to the Vikings, Normans and Germans.
Wonderful. Well, I better let you go because you're on stage soon, but
Thank you.
Was great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Max.
It's been a pleasure. Welcome.